Hey guys, Quiv the Lazy Geek here, and today we're going to talk about binning. What is binning? So this is actually something that when I was first seeing the word on forums and astrophotography related discussions, everyone was talking about binning as if it was the simplest thing in the world, and I had no idea what it actually meant. And that's why we have this video here. I'm going to go into what is binning, but also what binning actually does for you, and how it changes between a CCD camera and a CMOS camera, because those two are different technologies for the sensor of the camera, and binning is done differently for both, and the advantages of binning are lesser for one of those camera types. And let's go into the details. So first, what is binning? Binning is when you have a camera sensor, so it's done typically in a camera, and when you have a camera sensor, let's say 100 pixels per 100 pixels, each with a certain pixel size, well, you have a total of 10,000 pixels, and you take pictures with those 10,000 pixels. If I said I'm going to bin 2 by 2, it means that each square of 2 by 2 pixels that I have on my sensor, I will consider it as a single superpixel made of 4 subpixels in there. So I can just basically divide the width and the depth or the length of the camera sensor by 2 for each, and we end up with a camera sensor that's no longer 100 per 100, it's 50 per 50. It has a total of 2,500 pixels, so 4 times fewer than before, which makes sense because now we have 4 subpixels per 1 superpixel. And so we have a camera, the same camera sensor that we had. It covers the same field of view for the same telescope, but we now have fewer pixels, except that each pixel, each superpixel is bigger, is 4 times bigger than the original more granular pixels. And let's consider for the moment just the case of a monochrome sensor. And what I've described up to now, let's just imagine this is a monochrome sensor. And now we're going to ask ourselves, okay, so I'm just like taking multiple pixels and combining them into a superpixel. So I'm diminishing my resolution because the superpixel is much bigger, and the smaller pixels were able to actually capture more details with the same telescope. Okay, so resolution gets worse. So we lose resolution, but as you've seen in many of my videos, when you're sacrificing resolution, you're typically gaining something in return. And indeed, you are gaining something in return, whether you are using a CCD camera or a CMOS camera. When you're doing binning, you're gaining signal-to-noise ratio. So you're sacrificing your resolution to get more signal-to-noise ratio. So how much more signal-to-noise ratio? That's a big question. So obviously, if you're taking 4 pixels, you take them together, and you're taking the signal out of those 4 pixels, you're capturing within that superpixel 4 times more signal. After all, 4 times more light has reached those 4 pixels. If you take them all together in one, that superpixel will have 4 times more signal than each of the individual pixels. It makes sense. So it would seem that we increase our signal by 4, by a factor of 4, and therefore we are, we have a signal-to-noise ratio that is increased by a factor of 4. Not quite. Well, in some instances, yes, but not exactly. So first, a little reminder. Signal-to-noise ratio, this is what we're after. When we are taking astrophotographs, or even standard photography, really, you're after getting more signal, but you're also after lowering the noise, because if you lower the noise, you can actually pull the signal out more. So signal on its own or noise on its own doesn't mean much. I can have a super strong signal picture. If the noise is just as strong, I won't be able to extract the signal from the noise. So signal to noise is always what we're after in astrophotography. And binning helps us get better signal to noise ratio, but not Well, sometimes 4 times and sometimes 2 times. And let's go into the details. And for the details, we actually need to think about read noise. And this is the source of noise that we're going to consider. And read noise, you may want to watch a video about read noise that I have linked upstairs here, because it's an important concept in understanding why and how binning increases the signal-to-noise ratio. Let's consider either a CCD or CMOS camera with the 100 per 100 pixel sensor, so 10,000 pixels in total. And so each pixel will gather photons. Those photons are converted to electrons, and then the electrons are read out from each pixel, and this number of electrons and the readout is basically converted into a digital representation of that number using an analog to digital converter. Now, whenever you read a pixel, there is a source of noise called the read noise. And the read noise is an uncertainty about the exact value that I have measured in that particular pixel. So for example, let's say that we have a read noise of 3 electrons per pixel. That means that if I captured 10 electrons for that particular pixel, and when I read out the pixel, obviously the correct value that I read out should be 10, but because we have 3 electrons of read noise, it means that maybe what I'll have read is 12 electrons. Maybe I read 8 electrons. Maybe I read even 7, or maybe 13. So in some cases, rarer cases, it could be even 14 or 15, or maybe 6 or 5, really far from the 10 electrons that is the real signal that we're trying to capture. And that read noise is what will determine how much signal-to-noise ratio we gain by binning. If I take a CMOS camera, so this camera, for example, I think all of ZW cameras and most of the QHY cameras are CMOS sensors. What binning does is that it will first read out, so we have our 2x2 superpixel made of 4 subpixels, and CMOS can't be very smart about binning, unfortunately. It will need to read each pixel, each of the 4 pixels separately, and so it incurs, each time it incurs our read noise. And so we might think like, ooh, well, that's bad. That means that, okay, we've gathered 4 times more signal, but we've also gathered 4 times more read noise. And that is not exactly the case. And to understand why, you probably want to have a watch on my Noise in Astrophotography playlist, which I'm linking to above, but I'll still try to make it simple here. Basically, the read noise represents a deviation from the actual value of electrons that we are trying to measure from each pixel. That deviation might be positive, it might be negative. And if we have like an example of a superpixel where, okay, each value of the subpixels was 10 electrons for each. And then the first pixel actually measured 13 because of the read noise. The second pixel measured 7. The third pixel measured 12. The fourth pixel measured 8. And all of this is because of the read noise. Okay, so that means that in the end, if I average out everything, or if I add all of the pixel values together, then I measured a signal of 40, exactly the 40 that we wanted to measure. And it's as if the read noise was not even there at all. And that intuitively is the reason why the read noise is not just additive. So when we are adding the signal, sure, we are multiplying our signal by 4, But we cannot just say like, hey, in CMOS we are basically adding the read noise of each of the pixels, so we get 4 times the read noise as well. That's not the case. To do the addition of read noise is actually in statistics called a standard deviation. It's a measure of deviation from a desired value, let's say. And when you want to average out standard deviations, you do not add them and then divide that by the number of standard deviations that you're trying to average. You actually take their squares and then take the square root of the sum of those squares. Which means that in my superpixel, if I had 3 electrons per pixel of read noise, in the end I would actually sum 3 squared plus 3 squared plus 3 squared plus 3 squared, so 4 times 9 really, and then take the square root of that. So what is the square root of 4 times 9? Well, it is 2 times 3, which is 6. So we're not getting 4 times 3 are 12 electrons of read noise, we're getting 6 electrons of read noise. So we have doubled our noise in that superpixel, but then we've quadrupled our signal in that superpixel. So in the end, we are doubling our signal to noise ratio. Yeehaw! So this is good. And this is something that can be done in camera, but really it can also be done in post-processing. Because if you take the image from the camera and you perform a resampling or resizing, really to some extent, of that picture by dividing both dimensions by 2, well, the computer will be doing exactly the same method. It will take the values that it got from the camera and it takes the average. And while it's doing that, the read noise that was incurred, the read noise, I like to call it a tax, but the read noise tax that was incurred by the camera for each pixel is indirectly taken into account. So whether you do this calculation in camera or in post-processing in the PC, it does not change anything. It does change something if you do it in camera. The camera will do the binning, and then that means that through the USB cable, you'll have less data going through. Instead of sending data about 10,000 pixels in our 100 per 100 pixel sensor example, you're sending data about 2,500 pixels, so 4 times fewer pixels, which means that you can have more data transiting from the camera to the computer, and you'll have smaller subframes in terms of file size. So that can be an advantage, and it makes for faster processing, but knowing what I know now, I would never bin my CMOS cameras directly in the camera. I'd just do everything in post-processing if I wanted to try it. Okay, so now let's think about another type of sensor, not CMOS, but Ccd sensor. And Ccd sensors are older, and the way that they add multiple pixels into a superpixel is similar, but the Ccd camera will not have to read and digitize each subpixel of our superpixel separately. It can actually do the average or the sum of the signal value in the analog domain. So before we digitize our signal, so before we think about read noise, the Ccd camera will really consider all those 4 pixels as one single pixel and takes the full value of that single pixel, and then it reads it out. So then the read noise is equal to the read noise of a single subpixel. So we are multiplying our signal by 4, but we are having the same read noise of 3 electrons in our example, which means that we have quadrupled our signal-to-noise ratio if we're using a Ccd camera. So we are sacrificing resolution to quadruple our signal-to-noise ratio for Ccd, or to double our signal-to-noise ratio for CMOS, which is, it's a compromise, but the compromise makes more sense for Ccd than it does for CMOS. Although if you are oversampled, then you probably want to do that to resample your image to be at proper sample rate for your seeing conditions. Okay, so now we've talked about 4x4 binning, and sorry, 2x2 binning, so that you obtain a superpixel made of 4 subpixels. We can do 3x3 binning, and then we'll have a superpixel made of 9 subpixels. And we can do 4x4 binning, when then our superpixel will be made of 16 subpixels. And of course, the signal-to-noise ratio will increase the more you sacrifice resolution. So I think that's pretty clear. Now let's talk about what happens. We've talked about a monochrome camera up to here. Let's talk about what happens when we have a color camera, because color cameras make everything more complex. We have our pixels in the color camera, just like in the monochrome camera, except that on top of each pixel there's a small and very cute filter, color filter. Of maybe, then we have one pixel is red, the next one is green, the next one is green again, and the last one is blue. Red, green, green, blue. So we have 2x2 squares of red, green, green, blue pixels, like repeating themselves all across the sensor. So there is one thing I can do to very easily do some binning there, is to simply completely ignore the filters and just take my 2x2 pixels and do exactly the same thing as I would do for a monochrome sensor. And surprisingly, it works pretty well. And it's a perfectly acceptable solution. Except that, of course, in the end, since you've completely ignored the filters, your data is monochrome. So that's one thing. But since you have a color camera, that's not really something that you'd really want to do. The benefit doesn't outweigh the disadvantage. There's another method of binning for color cameras, which is, instead of using neighboring pixels like we've been doing up to now, you'd be choosing the closest pixels of the same color. And it gets quite complicated. You could have red, and then 2 below another red, 2 to the right another red, and 2 up another red. So there's more distance between those red pixels, but you combine them together using binning. And then you do the same thing for green and for blue. But obviously there's even more of a resolution sacrifice there, because you are averaging out or adding out the values that have more distance, physical distance between the pixels that are being added together. And when you're doing that, you're dragging parts of your object that are slightly like far away from other parts of your object, and you're like smashing them together and saying like, hey, they're the same, almost. And so you're really sacrificing a lot of resolution when you do that. And I'm not sure it's worth it. I've never binned actually with a color camera. So I can't really comment further on that. Now, that's pretty much it in terms of how binning works. I've noticed that there are some pretty good articles about binning from the main camera manufacturers. I found one from ZW that's fairly recent. There's another one from Attic that I don't know when it was published, and I'll put both links in the description down below. And so yes, that's pretty much it about binning. Like, would I personally bin in camera for my ZW cameras, which are CMOS? Nope, absolutely not. Would I bin if I had a CCD camera? If I were oversampled, meaning that I have my resolution per pixel is higher than the maximum resolution that I can get from my object, yeah, I totally would. If I am at a proper sample rate, would I bin? Maybe with a CCD camera. Yes, maybe. Because then maybe I can bin, and then I can dither, and then I can drizzle with a non-square kernel. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry too much about it. But there are ways that I can regain that resolution lost to some extent. Although when you regain resolution, there's again a problem of signal-to-noise ratio. So things get a bit complicated. In general, I don't bin, but it's a tool that is available in our arsenal of weapons. And if you need to use it, if you feel that you want to use it, you should. And you can always test it out. If you have a CMOS camera, you may not want to do it directly in camera. You may want to do it in software after you've taken the pictures. And I think that's pretty much it for binning. This has been going, again, my videos are so long, I'm so sorry about that. But I hope this was a useful video. If you found it useful, if you learned something new today, please click on the like button. Please also leave a comment down below with any remarks that you have about the video. And if you are not subscribed to this channel, please know that I have tons of new content coming up, and we already have tons of videos in the backlog that I have already published and I am planning to publish. So feel free, if you wish to do so, to subscribe, to maybe click on the little ping notification bell icon so you are notified when I have a new video up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was useful. As always, don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.